Welcome to In the Field Audio Bible's Easter mini-series, The Kiss, the Cross, and the Crown. My name is Christy, your host for this fourth episode called The Weight of the Cross, Golgotha's Agony. Over these 7 episodes, we will journey through the final days of Jesus Christ, from the moment of Judas's betrayal to Jesus' glorious ascension. Tonight, we follow Jesus through his trials before Pilate and Herod, where he endures flogging and the betrayal of those who once cried, "Hosanna," now turning to shout, "Crucify him." The night has barely surrendered to morning, and a ghostly haze clings to the streets of Jerusalem. The air is damp, with the lingering chill of the early hours, yet the city is already stirring. Somewhere in the distance, a rooster crows, oblivious to the trial that has unfolded in the dead of night. The scent of burning oil and smoldering embers drifts from the homes that line the narrow alleyways. Merchants are beginning to set up their stalls, sleepily arranging their goods, unaware, or perhaps willfully ignorant, of the storm of events unfolding beyond their doors. Within the cold, towering walls of the praetorium, Jesus stands before Pontius Pilate. His body, already weary and battered, is streaked with blood, his face marred by the blows from the temple guards. The bruises bloom purple and black against his skin. His lower lip split. A slow trickle of blood dried at the corner of his mouth. His robe, once unblemished, now clings to him, damp with sweat and caked with the dust of the places he has been dragged through. His hands, bound tightly with thick ropes, they are rubbed raw. And yet he stands, silent, unwavering. Pilate studies him, searching his face for defiance, for some trace of the zealotry that the chief priests insist is there. But he finds nothing. No anger, no fear, only a calmness that unsettles the hardened governor. Pilate has judged many men, most of them trembling, pleading or cursing his name. But this one is different. The tension in the hall is palpable. A few Roman guards shift their weight uncomfortably, sensing that this is no ordinary prisoner. The chief priests and elders stand rigid, their expressions hard and expectant, eyes fixed on Pilate as they await his verdict. Beyond the walls, the rising murmur of an anxious crowd gathers like a storm brewing over the sea. The people are restless. The priests have seen to that. Pilate exhales sharply. "Are you the king of the Jews?" His voice is measured, his tone more curious than accusatory. Jesus raises his head. His eyes, though weary, hold on intensity that causes even the most seasoned of soldiers to shift uneasily. When he speaks, his voice is neither defensive nor afraid. "You say that I am." Pilate leans back, pressing his lips together. He sees no insurrectionist before him, no criminal deserving of death. He turns to the priest, his voice edged with frustration. "I find no fault in this man." But the priests are relentless. They press in, their voices rising, their accusations flying like arrows in battle. He stirs up people. He speaks against Caesar. He claims to be the Son of God. Pilate's jaw tightens. He has no patience for their religious disputes. but he is not fool enough to ignore the politics at play. If this man is a threat to Rome's control, then something must be done. But Pilate is not eager to be the one who spills innocent blood. Then an idea strikes him. "He is a Galilean," Pilate murmurs, glancing toward the priest. A murmur of affirmation ripples through them. Pilate exhales, seizing his opportunity. "Then let Herod deal with him." Herod Antipas, the ruler of Galilee, is in Jerusalem for the festival. Pilate wastes no time. Jesus is taken under heavy guard, escorted through the streets to the palace where Herod resides. The streets, once hushed in the early morning, are now alive with murmurs and hushed speculation. Eyes peek from behind doorways, from beneath market stalls, as the bruised and bound figure of Jesus is marched forward. Herod receives him with a twisted sense of amusement. He has long desired to see Jesus, to witness some spectacle from this so-called miracle worker. He leans forward, eyes glittering with cruel curiosity. "Perform a sign for me," he demands. "Show me the power you claim to have." But Jesus is silent. His lips do not part. His gaze does not falter. He does not entertain mockery. Herod presses further, hurling question after question, but still, Jesus does not answer. Frustration turns to anger, and Herod, feeling mocked, turns to his soldiers. "Dress him as a king," he sneers. They drape a gaudy robe over Jesus' shoulders, jeering and bowing in false reverence. The laughter echoes through the halls as they push him about like a puppet, delighting in their cruelty. But Herod has no real desire to execute Jesus. He has had his sport, and so Herod sends Jesus back to Pilate, the mocking robe still clinging to his torn and bodied form. Pilate sighs when he sees Jesus return, a knowing weariness settling in his bones. He had hoped to wash his hands of this entire affair, but now it is back in his hands. As Pilate ponders his dilemma, a thought occurs to him. There is a custom during the Passover festival. One prisoner may be released to the people. A notorious criminal, Barabbas, sits in the dungeons beneath the city, a murderer, a rebel against Rome. Pilate sees his opportunity. Surely, if given the choice, the crowd will choose Jesus over Barabbas. The gates to the courtyard are thrown open, and Barabbas is dragged forth. His chains rattle as he is shoved beside Jesus. He is filthy, his face hardened by crime, his eyes wild and defiant. Pilate steps forward, raising his arms. "Who do you want me to release to you? Barabbas or Jesus, who is called the Christ?" The crowd erupts. The priests and elders, having swayed the people, cry out first, "Give us Barabbas!" The chant spreads, growing louder, a tide of fury. "Barabbas! Barabbas!" Pilate is stunned, his gestures toward Jesus. "And what shall I do with this man?" The answer comes like thunder. "Crucify him!" The order is given. Jesus is seized by the soldiers, led into the courtyard for the scourging. As the crowd jeered, Jesus was led away. The heavy, oppressive air of the courtyard seemed to thicken as soldiers gathered around him, their faces hard, their eyes cold with contempt. His body, already weary from the long night of mockery and judgment, now stood before them as a mere target for their cruelty. The first lash came with a brutal force. The leather whips entwined with sharp pieces of bone and metal. Jesus flinched, the pain searing through his skin. a scream barely escaping his lips as a cruel weapon tore through his flesh. His muscles stiffened, but his heart remained fixed, focused, even in this agony. Another strike, then another, and yet despite the relentless blows, his gaze never wavered. The soldiers, eager in their vicious task, whipped him again and again, their cruelty unyielding. The whip cracked in the air, and with each stroke, the sharp sting cut deeper into his back, tearing into his flesh, exposing raw muscle and bone. His skin began to swell and bruise, darkening under the force of their punishment. Jesus' breathing became shallow, labored. His body shuddered as he stood bound to the post, unable to move. The rough wood of the pillar pressing into his chest. The beating went on and on, each strike a reminder of the hatred that hung in the air. His heart was heavy, but his spirit, though battered, remained unbroken. How many times? 1, 2, 3? More? The lashings seemed endless, a merciless rhythm that filled the courtyard with the sound of cracking leather. But Jesus did not count them. His mind was elsewhere, on the path that lay before him, the final destination where his sacrifice would fulfill a greater purpose. With each lash, the soldiers took their cruel delight, mocking him as he bled. They spit on him, laughed, and called him names. Yet amidst this mockery, Jesus' thoughts turned to the people he loved, those he had healed, those he had reached out to. His heart, though broken by the hatred of the world, still beat for them, for the lost, for the hopeless, for those who would come to know the love he offered through this suffering. It was in this moment of torment that he felt it, the weight of the world's sins pressing down on him, not as a mere man, but as the one who would take it all upon himself. The pain was unbearable, yes. His body was weakening, but in the depths of that agony, there was a strange peace, a quiet, knowing that this suffering, this excruciating pain was not the end. And then, at last, they stopped. The soldiers stepped back, their faces still twisted in mockery, and Jesus stood there, bleeding, barely able to keep his knees from buckling under the weight of his own body. But through the haze of pain, there was a clarity in his eyes. The flogging had not broken him, not the way they had hoped. It had not crushed the love he carried in his heart. Instead, it had refined him, prepared him for what was to come. And as he lifted his head, bloodied and bruised, it was clear he was ready. After the flogging, the soldiers are not done. They press a crown of thorns deep into his brow. Blood trickles down his face as they mock him, laughing, spitting, kneeling in mock reverence. They strike him repeatedly, yet he does not resist. Then, at last, they drag Jesus forward once more. The time has come. A great wooden cross is heaved before him, rough and splintered. The beams are thick, worn from the weight of previous executions. Splinters jut out like jagged teeth, cutting into his torn shoulders as they shove it onto his back. His knees buckle for a moment, but he does not fall. The crowd has grown, pressing in, some shouting in mockery, others watching in silence, their faces pale. Some women weep, their sobs swallowed by the jeers. The sky, once bright with morning light, seems to darken as Jesus takes his first step forward. Each breath is labored, each step agonizing. The weight of the cross is immeasurable, but he carries it still. The road to Golgotha has begun. This is the weight of the cross. The room is dimly lit by the flickering flame of an oil lamp, the shadows stretching long against the walls as Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John sit gathered at the table, quills in hand. The only sound in the room is the steady scratch of their pens on parchment. Each one carefully writing, recounting the story that will change the world. But tonight, the weight of what they are writing seems to press on them. The words heavier than usual, filled with sorrow and grief. As they work, they find themselves speaking, their voices soft but filled with emotion. The pain of what they are witnessing on the pages, as real as the moment itself. Matthew speaks first, his quill pausing over his parchment as his thoughts wander back to that moment in the governor's hall. I can still see Pilate, the Roman governor, standing before the crowd. He says softly. He had tried to reason with them. He even asked, "What evil has he done?" His voice was uncertain. I could tell he wanted to set Jesus free. But the crowd... Matthew's voice falters slightly. They shouted, "Crucify him! Crucify him!" The roar of it still echoes in my ears. How could they ask for his death? Mark, his brow furrowed, nods slowly. "I felt the same way, Matthew," he says, his voice tight with frustration. Pilate didn't want to do it. He tried everything, offering them Barabbas instead, trying to wash his hands of the whole thing. But the crowd, they were relentless. They didn't want Barabbas. They wanted Jesus gone. I watched as Pilate gave in. It's a moment I can't erase from my mind. He had the power to stop it, but he didn't. Luke, ever the historian, speaks with a steady calm, his voice softer than the others. Pilate was trapped. He was trapped, though, wasn't he? He offers gently, his pen moving slowly as he writes. He knew the truth. He knew Jesus was innocent, but his hands were tied, caught between the will of the people and his own conscience. And so in the end, he did what he had to do, though I'm sure it tore him apart inside. He sentenced Jesus to die. John's voice is quiet but filled with deep sadness. I watched it too, he says, his words almost a whisper. And I knew that the time had come. Jesus was going to be handed over, and there was nothing anyone could do to stop it. The crowd, those very people who had cheered for him days before, now screamed for his blood. And as I watched, I couldn't help but feel heartbroken. They didn't understand. They didn't know what they were asking for. The room falls silent for a moment as they all reflect on the weight of what they've just written. It's a heavy, suffocating silence filled with the burden of the story they are telling. Then Mark speaks again, his voice now laced with sorrow as he picks up the thread of the narrative. And then they took him away. They stripped him of his clothes. They put a scarlet robe on him. And they twisted a crown of thorns and pressed it into his head. I can still see his face, the pain, the humiliation. It was hard to watch. Luke looks up from his writing, his eyes filled with empathy. That crown of thorns, it wasn't just a crown. It was a mockery of what he truly is, the King of Kings. And they didn't even realize it. They didn't understand that they were crowning him, not in glory, but in suffering. Matthew, his voice thick with emotion, continues. And then they mocked him. They spat on him, struck him, and said, "Hail, King of the Jews." They didn't see him for who he was. They didn't understand that every insult, every blow was part of the sacrifice. He could have called upon legions of angels to stop it, but he didn't. He stayed silent. And in that silence, he showed us the depth of his love. John's voice trembles as he picks up the narrative. He was already so weak. I could see it in his eyes. His body was bruised, bloodied, battered, and yet he still carried that cross. When they placed it on his shoulders, I thought he might collapse right there, unable to bear the weight. But he didn't stop. He picked it up, and he began to walk. Mark's eyes harden as he adds, I don't think any of us fully realize what that would mean. Jesus had been beaten, whipped, and mocked. He was already so weak, and yet they forced him to carry that heavy cross through the streets. I watched as he stumbled. His legs barely held him up, and I knew that this walk was more than just a physical one. It was a walk of sacrifice, a walk toward his death, and he didn't turn away from it. He kept going. Luke's voice is soft, almost reverential. He didn't deserve that cross. He had done nothing wrong, but he carried it as though it were his destiny. And in a way, it was. He was carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders, the weight of all our sins, and he didn't falter. He didn't turn back. John pauses, his eyes distant as he recalls the moment. I could still see it in my mind. The way he moved, so slow, so broken, but still so determined. The cross was too heavy for him to bear alone, and when he stumbled again, they forced him to get up, even though the walk to Golgotha was long. It was agonizing. Matthew nods, his voice barely above a whisper now. The crowd kept following, some shouting, others weeping. And Jesus, he kept walking. And I remember, despite the suffering that he was enduring, he stopped. He looked at the women who were following, the ones who were crying for him. And he said, "Daughters of Jerusalem, do not weep for me, but weep for yourselves and for your children." Mark's voice cracks as he speaks again, his pen trembling in his hand. And still, he didn't stop. He kept moving forward. Each step was harder than the last, but he didn't turn back. And in those final moments, I realized something I had never understood before. He wasn't just walking for himself. He was walking for us. For me. For you. For the whole world. Luke looks at the others, his voice steady but filled with the sorrow of the moment. I think that's when it really hit me, what he was doing. He wasn't just carrying a cross. He was carrying our sins. He was walking to the place where he would give his life for us. And he knew it. He knew every step would bring him closer to his death. And still, he kept going. John leans back in his chair, his hand resting on the parchment, the weight of the moment sinking in. I don't think any of us will ever truly understand the depth of his love, he says quietly. But as I watched him carry that cross, I knew it wasn't just a man walking. It was the Savior walking to his death for all of us. The room is silent for a long moment, the weight of their words hanging in the air like a heavy cloud. None of them speak, lost in their own thoughts, each one reflecting on the journey they have just described. The quills are still for a time, the silence a reflection of the sorrow they feel for the story they are telling. Finally, Matthew speaks again, but his voice, soft but resolute. He didn't stop. He didn't turn away. He kept walking, and with each step, he was closer to the cross. And that is where we must leave it for now. The room remains quiet, the only sound, the faint crackling of the oil lamp. But though the night presses on, the story they are telling is far from over. It is only just beginning. As the final words echo in the room, and the last lines are written in the gospel stories, I want to thank you for walking this journey with me. I hope as we sit at the table with Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, listening to their quills scratch across parchment, you've been transported into the heart of one of the most profound moments in history. And just as they reflected on the weight of what Jesus endured, we too are called to pause and reflect. You've heard about Jesus' trial before Pilate, the mocking crowd, the pain he endured, and the moment when he had to carry that cross, an instrument of his death. And as his suffering deepens with every step, we can't help but ask, what can we learn from this? Jesus' trial was not only a trial before the Roman governor, it was a trial of human hearts, a test of faith, a test of loyalty. He stood before Pilate, who was confused by the charges, but was powerless in making the right decision. Pilate was caught in the middle, torn between appeasing the crowd and knowing that Jesus was innocent. He symbolizes the struggle of many who face the truth, but feel the pressure to conform. His actions show how fear of the crowd, the desire for approval, and the need for personal gain can often cloud our better judgment. Then there's Herod, a ruler who mocked Jesus, who saw him as a mere curiosity, a spectacle to entertain him. Herod represents the cold indifference and lack of true understanding that the world often shows towards suffering and injustice. How many times in our own lives do we brush aside what's inconvenient, choosing entertainment over empathy or avoidance over action? And the Roman soldiers, oh, how they mocked him. They beat him, crowned him with thorns, and ridiculed him. They treated him as less than human, completely unaware of the divine purpose he carried. How often do we, in our daily lives, diminish others? Do we view people who are different from us with contempt, or do we look at them as valuable? The soldiers did not see who Jesus truly was, but we are called to see Christ in everyone we meet, to remember the dignity of each person, no matter their station in life. Then the people, the same voices who had once shouted, "Hosanna," now cried out, "Crucify him." They had witnessed miracles, heard the truth, yet in that moment, they chose to reject it. But it wasn't just them, it's us too. We have all rejected Jesus in moments of doubt, fear, or ignorance. How many times have we turned away from his ways because it was easier, or because the world offered us something else? But as we reflect on this powerful moment in history, we must turn our focus back to Jesus, his silence, his dignity, and his willingness to endure the cross. In the face of unjust trials, mockery, and pain, he did not retaliate. He didn't strike back. He didn't seek revenge. Instead, he walked forward, step by agonizing step, toward the cross, knowing that through his sacrifice, the world would be reconciled to God. And here's the thing. This is where we find the most profound lesson. Jesus' response to suffering was one of complete submission to the will of his Father. He could have chosen to fight back. He could have chosen to call down legions of angels to rescue him. But he chose to endure. Why? Because he knew the bigger picture. He understood that his suffering was not meaningless. It was redemptive. And so I ask you, how do we as followers of Christ respond to suffering, to unfair circumstances, to injustice? Jesus didn't call us to avoid pain, but to carry our crosses just as he carried his. He asked us to take up our cross, not as a burden to resent, but as a symbol of the love that conquers all. He didn't flee from suffering, and neither should we. In the hardest moments of life, we are called to carry our burdens with grace, knowing that the same love that kept Jesus on the cross is the same love that sustains us in our darkest hours. Think of Pilate. How many times do we stand in the face of the truth but choose the easier way out, the path of least resistance? Pilate had the power to set Jesus free, but in his indecision, he washed his hands of the matter. How often do we, when faced with a hard choice, choose silence or inaction because we don't want to upset the balance or face the consequences? We learn from Pilate that indecision in the face of truth is still a choice, and a choice that can have consequences. The Roman soldiers, the very ones who mocked Jesus and crowned him with thorns, remind us that there is a temptation in all of us to be desensitized to suffering. We can become accustomed to violence, so accustomed to mistreatment that we don't even recognize the humanity in those who suffer. How do we treat the poor, the vulnerable, and the marginalized? Jesus calls us to see his face in the least of these, in those who suffer the most. When we look at those who are hurting, we must see him, just as the soldiers failed to see him for who he truly was. As we reflect on all that Jesus endured, we must ask ourselves, how can we live differently? When life is hard, when the world turns against us, when the cross we bear feels too heavy, can we look to Jesus as our example? Can we trust in His will even when we don't understand the path He has set before us? Can we love those who hate us, bless those who curse us, and walk in His footsteps despite the suffering we face? The people who were against Jesus, whether they were mocking, rejecting, or simply standing by in silence, show us that apathy, indifference, and even outright hostility to Christ are not new. And yet Jesus responded not with hatred or retaliation, but with love. He loved even the ones who rejected Him. He loved even the ones who drove the nails into His hands. He loved the ones who shouted, "Crucify Him." And He calls us to do the same. Friends, as we leave this time of reflection, let's take these lessons and let them mold us. When you face rejection, when life feels unjust, when you feel like you've been abandoned or ridiculed, think of Jesus. Think of His trial, His flogging, His journey with the cross, and remember that He walked this path for you. And when you find yourself in a position where you can choose grace over anger, where you can choose love over hate, where you can choose to serve over being served, choose it. Because Jesus didn't just suffer for us to be saved. He suffered to show us the way. So I leave this with you. Take a moment in your day, in your life, to reflect on Jesus' example. Let it be more than just a story on the page. Let it be a challenge. Let it be a call to live differently, to choose love, to choose sacrifice, to choose grace. Because when we do, we not only walk the road Jesus walked, but we also become a part of His story. A story of redemption, a story of hope, and a story that changes everything. Thank you for joining me tonight as we journeyed through this 4th episode of The Kiss, the Cross, and the Crown. I pray that you carry these reflections with you into your day, into your week, and that you find strength in knowing God is with you in every trial, every temptation, and every step of obedience. If this time in God's Word has encouraged you, take a moment to share it with someone who might need it. And be sure to join me next time as we continue walking from Judas's kiss to Jesus' glorious ascension, learning, growing, and staying faithful in the field of life. Until next time, may you find peace in the quiet, trust in God's call, and rest in His unchanging love. This is In the Field Audio Bible, where we listen to the Bible one chapter at a time. Thank you for listening to The Kiss, the Cross, and the Crown, brought to you by In the Field Media, a nonprofit ministry dedicated to sharing the message of faith through the spoken word with In the Field Audio Bible, uplifting worship on WFWR, In the Field Worship Radio, and inspiring Christian programming on In the Field TV. If this mini-series has blessed you, we invite you to support future series with a tax-deductible donation at inthefieldAudiobible.com/donate. Every contribution goes directly to this digital ministry, helping spread the gospel to hearts around the world. From all of us at In the Field Media, thank you for being a part of this journey. May God's grace and peace be with you always.